Welcome to Spicy Family Scandals, where real-life drama meets hard-earned wisdom. Today's story is about betrayal, resilience, and the power of standing up for yourself. Let's dive in. The first thing I noticed was the laughter. Not Todd's tickle-dry chuckle or his polite, practiced laugh he used with clients. This was different. Low, intimate, and unmistakably indulgent. I froze halfway down the stairs, gripping the railing to steady myself. It was nearly midnight, and Todd had been in his study for hours, supposedly working late on an urgent proposal. Curious and uneasy, I crept down a few more steps, staying in the shadow of the landing. His voice carried through the cracked door, warm and teasing. "You know I've got it all planned out, right? She'll never see it coming. By the time she realizes, we'll be sipping champagne in Maui." I felt my stomach drop, but I didn't make a sound. My instincts told me to stay still, to absorb every word. "She's so predictable," he continued, his tone dripping with derision. "Spends all her time fussing over her perfect home. It's pathetic, really. She doesn't even realize it's all for nothing. It'll be ours soon, baby. Just be patient." At the sound of a woman's voice, soft and syrupy, responded, but I couldn't make out her words. My pulse rode in my ears, drowning out everything else. I had to fight the urge to burst through that door and confront him. But no, this wasn't the moment. Not yet. I retreated silently up the stairs and into our bedroom, my heart racing and my mind spinning. For 20 years, I had poured every ounce of myself into this house, this marriage, this family. I built Todd's life, brick by brick, piece by piece, and now he was planning to hand it all to someone else. The rage hit me first, hot, white, and blinding, but beneath it, there was something colder, sharper, more calculating. If Todd thought he could dismantle my life and walk away unscathed, he was in for the shock of his life. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the dark, piecing together fragments of the past few months. The late night, work calls, the sudden gym membership, the new wardrobe that felt too polished for a man who used to prefer sweatpants. It all fit together now, a puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving. By the time the sun rose, I had a plan. Todd might have thought he was clever, but he underestimated the woman he married. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet. No, I was going to let him hang himself with his own lies. He wanted to play games. Fine, I'd show him how the game is really played. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Todd whistling in the kitchen. Whistling, like a man without a care in the world. I stayed in bed for a few moments, listening to the cheerful clatter of dishes as he prepared his usual breakfast. Eggs, toast, and a protein shake. He'd always been a creature of habit, predictable to the point of dullness. I suppose that's why I never imagined him capable of what I'd overheard. By the time I made my way downstairs, Todd was at the table, scrolling through his phone and sipping coffee. He looked up and flashed me a smile, the kind that had charmed me 2 decades ago. Now, it made my skin crawl. "Morning, Claire. Sleep okay?" "Like a baby." I lied, reaching for the coffee pot. My hands didn't shake, which surprised me. "How about you? Must have been a late one with all that work." "Yeah," he replied casually, not missing a beat. "Deadlines. You know how it is." I fought the urge to laugh. "Deadlines? Sure. For what exactly?" "Plotting my humiliation. Handing over my life to some faceless mistress." "Don't work too hard," I said, smiling as I kissed him on the cheek. It was a move straight from his own playbook. Deceptive, calculated, and designed to lull him into a false sense of control. By mid-morning, Todd had left for the office, and the house was mine. I sat in the living room, staring at the framed family photos lining the mantel. There we were at Disney World, grinning with sunburned faces. Todd, Ellie, and I in matching sweaters one Christmas posing by the tree. And then the wedding photo. Todd in his tux, me in my ivory gown. Both of us glowing with optimism. It was all a lie now. The life I'd built, the family I'd poured myself into, it was nothing more than a backdrop for Todd's betrayal. But I wasn't going to mourn. I wasn't going to cry or wallow. That wasn't me. Instead, I got to work. The first step was gathering evidence. I didn't know who she was or how far their relationship had gone, but I was going to find out. Todd had always been confident with technology. Too confident. His phone, his emails, his financial accounts. They were all accessible with the right tools. And I had time. It took less than an hour to get into his personal email. My heart raced as I scrolled through his inbox, scanning for anything out of place. It didn't take long. There it was, a thread labeled, Dreams for the Future Bore. My breath hitched as I opened it. The messages were as nauseating as I'd expected. Todd and Sophie, exchanging plans, fantasies, and even blueprints for their dream life. She wanted to redecorate the living room. He promised her a new cart. Mercedes, no less. And the house. My house, our house. Sophie, you'll love it here, he'd written. It's everything you deserve. I can't wait to make it ours. My stomach churned with fury, but I stayed focused. I downloaded the entire thread, saved it to a hidden folder on my laptop, and kept digging. I didn't stop until I had a small arsenal of evidence. Emails, photos, bank statements showing suspicious charges. Todd had been sloppy, and I was going to use every mistake to my advantage. When Todd came home that evening, I greeted him with a smile and his favorite bourbon on ice. Long day? I asked sweetly. He grinned, oblivious. You could say that. I wanted to laugh at the irony. Long day. He had no idea how long the days ahead would become for him. Because now, I wasn't just his wife. I was his worst nightmare. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act. Todd carried on as if nothing had changed, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath his feet was starting to crumble. Every evening, he'd come home, kiss me on the cheek, and ask what was for dinner, as though he wasn't actively plotting to dismantle the life we'd built together. It was almost laughable. What he didn't know was that I'd already started dismantling his. The first move in my plan was to understand just how far his betrayal reached. I wasn't satisfied with emails and sweet nothings exchanged over wine-fueled texts. I needed leverage, something that would ensure when the time came, I could tear him down completely. On a hunch, I decided to check the guest bedroom. Todd rarely went in there. It was my crafting space, filled with half-finished quilts and bins of fabric. But something about the way he avoided it made me suspicious. I started with the closet. At first, it seemed normal: spare linens, holiday decorations, a few forgotten boxes. But the back, behind a dusty garment bag, I found it. A sleek black duffel bag I didn't recognize. My pulse quickened as I unzipped it. Inside was a treasure trove of secrets. Plane tickets to Maui. 2 seats booked for Todd H. and Sophie G. There were receipts for jewelry I'd never seen, fancy dinners at restaurants I'd never been invited to, and even a real estate brochure for a beachfront villa. But the kicker was the envelope. It was tucked into the side pocket, thick with what felt like documents. I opened it to find a set of legal papers. Divorce forms. My name was already filled in as the respondent. The audacity nearly knocked the wind out of me. Todd wasn't just planning to leave me. He was preparing to rip away everything I'd built. I sat there, clutching the papers, my vision swimming with rage. He thought he could replace me with Sophie and parade her around in my house. Not a chance. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it and closed the closet door. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clearer than ever. Todd thought he was ahead of me, that he was the one controlling the narrative. But now, I had the one thing he never expected: proof of his intentions. That evening, I joined him on the couch, curling up beside him like nothing was wrong. He glanced at me, surprised but pleased. "You're in a good mood," he said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "Just feeling lucky," I replied, keeping my voice light. "We've built such a good life here, haven't we?" "Oh, of course," he said, a hint of hesitation creeping into his tone. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," I said, smiling up at him. "I just want to make sure we appreciate it while we have it." The double meaning wasn't lost on me, but Todd didn't seem to catch it. He just nodded, already shifting his focus back to the television. Inside, I was simmering with anticipation. I'd uncovered the foundation of his betrayal, and now it was time to start laying traps. He wanted a fight. I'd give him one, but on my terms. The next phase of my plan required precision. I didn't want to just catch Todd. I wanted to unravel him, to leave him with nothing but the consequences of his deceit. To do that, I needed allies, or at least, unwitting participants. And I knew exactly where to start. Ellie, our daughter, was away at college, but she was coming home for a weekend visit. She'd always been close to her dad, the quintessential daddy's girl, which made her the perfect pawn in this game. If anyone could make Todd slip up, it was her. The night she arrived, I made sure everything was perfect. Her favorite pasta for dinner, fresh flowers in her room, and a carefully laid trap in the form of casual conversation. "So, Dad," Ellie asked between bites of garlic bread, "I need big plans for the summer." Todd barely glanced up from his plate. "Work as usual. Might take a trip or two." Ellie tilted her head. "A trip? With Mom?" He hesitated just for a second, but it was enough. We'll see. Nothing's set in stone." I bit back a smile, pretending to be absorbed in twirling my pasta. "You two should go somewhere," Ellie pressed, ever the sweet optimist. "You've been working so hard. Maybe Hawaii. Mom's always wanted to go there. Right?" Todd's hand twitched, his fork clinking against the plate. "Hawaii is expensive," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "I thought you said you were going there for work." I chimed in, my voice casual but pointed. His head snapped toward me, and I met his gaze with a serene smile. "You mentioned it a while back," I added, feigning confusion. "Something about scouting opportunities, or was that a different trip?" Todd cleared his throat, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "No. That must have been someone else." Ellie frowned. "Word. You never mix things up like that, Dad." I shrug, giving her a conspiratorial smile. "He's been so busy lately, I'm surprised he remembers anything. But hey, maybe I'll plan a trip for us. We could use some time away, don't you think, Todd?" His jaw tightened, but he forced a chuckle. "Sure. That sounds great." After dinner, I busied myself cleaning up while Todd retreated to his study, no doubt trying to figure out how much I knew. Ellie lingered, drying dishes while I washed. "Is everything okay with you too?" she asked, her brow furrowed. I turned to her, careful to look both surprised and mildly amused. "Of course. Why would you ask?" "I don't know," she said, hesitating. "Dad just seemed off. Like he's hiding something." Bingo. I laughed lightly, ruffling her hair like she was still my little girl. "Sweetheart, your dad's always like that when he's stressed. Don't worry about it." She didn't seem convinced, but she let it go. For now. That night I waited until Todd was asleep before sneaking into his study. His laptop was locked, but I already had the password. He thought he was clever, using our anniversary as his code, but it only made my access feel more justified. I went straight to his calendar. Sure enough, there was an entry marked, "Client meeting," for the exact dates on the plane tickets I'd found. Client meeting, my foot. I scrolled further, my heart pounding as I uncovered more discrepancies. Appointments that didn't match his work schedule. Lunches and dinners with no names attached. Todd was meticulous, but his arrogance was his downfall. Satisfied, I closed the laptop and slipped back into bed. He was building a web of lies, and I was systematically unraveling every thread. By the time this was over, Todd wouldn't just lose the house. He'd lose everything he loved, and he'd never see it coming. The next morning, Todd left for work without a second glance, his briefcase in one hand and a travel mug in the other. He kissed me on the cheek like every other day, and I played along, giving him a warm smile as though I wasn't already 3 moves ahead of him. Once he was out of the driveway, I sat down with my coffee, opened my laptop, and began phase 2. The information I'd uncovered in his calendar and emails was valuable, but it was time to bring someone else into the game. The mistress. Her name, Sophie G., had appeared in his emails and text exchanges, and I dug up enough breadcrumbs to track her down. A quick search of social media confirmed what I suspected. Sophie was younger, prettier, and far too eager to play house in my home. Her Instagram feed was full of glossy photos, beach vacations, designer handbags, and selfies that oozed smug entitlement. One particular post caught my attention. It was a picture of her holding a champagne flute, her caption teasing, "Celebrating new beginnings. Soon, anyway." The timestamp aligned almost perfectly with the date Todd had booked the plane tickets. I stared at the photo, my rage simmering. She was flaunting her affair in plain sight, confident that she'd won. But she didn't know me, and she certainly didn't know what I was capable of. That evening, I let Ellie distract Todd with her stories from college while I slipped back into his study. This time, I wasn't just looking for evidence. I was planting seeds. From his email account, I drafted a message to Sophie. "We need to talk. Something's come up, and I can't follow through on our plans. Claire is starting to suspect. Let's cool things off for a while." I hit send and logged out. If I was going to dismantle their little fantasy, I needed them to start doubting each other. By the next afternoon, the cracks began to show. Todd was unusually quiet at dinner, picking at his food while Ellie chatted about her plans to visit her best friend over the summer. "You okay, Dad?" she asked, frowning. "Fine," he muttered, forcing a smile. But I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his phone sat untouched on the counter, as if he were dreading what might appear on the screen. That night, after Ellie went to bed, I made my next move. I slipped into Todd's study again and found his phone. He had a habit of leaving it unlocked when he was home, and tonight was no exception. I opened his messages and found Sophie's reply. "What do you mean, cool things off? We've been planning this for months. You said she'd never find out." I smirked. "Good." I deleted the message and returned his phone to the desk. Then I sent Sophie another email from his account. "I'm sorry. This is getting too complicated. Maybe it's best if we both move on." By the time Todd and Sophie realized what was happening, they'd be too busy tearing each other apart to notice my next steps. The following morning, as Todd left for work, I gave him an extra warm goodbye, even slipping a love note into his briefcase for good measure. He didn't notice the envelope I'd slid beneath the windshield wiper of his car. Printed copy of the plane tickets, alongside the caption from Sophie's Instagram post. By the time he figured it out, I'd be long gone for the day. I had a meeting with a lawyer, and I wasn't walking away from this empty-handed. By the time I arrived at the lawyer's office, I had the beginnings of a plan so sharp it almost felt cruel. Almost. The attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Meredith, reviewed the folder of evidence I'd brought. Emails, financial records, and copies of the divorce papers Todd had hidden in the guest room. "This is solid," she said, flipping through the documents. "You have enough here to get a significant settlement, especially given the circumstances. Do you want to proceed with filing?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I don't want him to see it coming." Meredith raised an eyebrow, intrigued but professional. "Then what's your next move?" "Leverage," I replied. "I'm not just walking away with a check. I want to leave him with nothing." She nodded slowly, clearly recognizing the determination in my voice. "Then you'll need more than this. You'll need to catch him in the act, ideally in a way that's indisputable." I left the office with her card in my pocket and a new sense of purpose. The stage was set. Now I just had to bait the trap. That evening, I played the perfect wife, cooking Todd's favorite dinner and asking about his day. He was distracted, barely answering as he picked at his plate. Every time his phone buzzed, he glanced at it nervously but didn't respond. "What's wrong?" I asked sweetly, tilting my head like I cared. "Nothing," he said too quickly, forcing a smile. I leaned closer, resting a hand on his. "You've been so tense lately. Is something going on at work?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just the usual stress. Don't worry about it." His lie was almost laughable. Sophie was likely blowing up his phone, demanding answers. I could only imagine the panic brewing beneath his carefully constructed facade. The next morning, I made my boldest move yet. Todd always left for work before me, so after he was gone, I went into the garage and retrieved the spare key to his office. I'd never used it before, but today I had a reason. Todd's office was a sterile, corporate space, decorated with generic artwork and too much gray. I ignored the aesthetics and went straight to his desk. His personal laptop was there, password protected, but I'd already cracked it. What I found was a treasure trove of deceit. Financial documents detailing secret accounts, payment records to Sophie, and even a digital journal where Todd had recorded his plans. He'd been careful to keep it vague, but the intent was clear. He'd been siphoning funds from our joint accounts to fund his new life. I copied everything onto a USB drive, then wiped any trace of my access. As I locked his office and left, my mind raced with possibilities. Todd wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a criminal, stealing from the life we'd built together. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was an attack. That evening, I played it cool again, chatting with Todd about Ellie's plans for the summer and pretending to care about his fabricated stress at work. Inside, though, I was electrified. The pieces were coming together. I had the evidence, the strategy, and the resolve to see this through. Todd had no idea that while he was busy plotting my downfall, I was building his. The following week, I escalated the game. Todd was unraveling faster than I'd expected, his lies tangling into knots he couldn't untee. Sophie must have been relentless. His phone vibrated nonstop during dinner, his brow constantly furrowed with irritation. I could see it in the way he avoided looking at me directly, the way his smile never reached his eyes. He was cracking. Perfect. I made my next move on Friday. Todd had a late meeting at work, which I knew was code for sneaking off with Sophie. I'd confirmed their rendezvous through his calendar. He'd booked a reservation at a high-end restaurant downtown. The thought of him whining and dining her while pretending to work made my blood boil, but I kept my anger in check. After Todd left, I slipped on my black trench coat, grabbed my keys, and headed out. I didn't go to the restaurant. I didn't need to confront them in person just yet. Instead, I went somewhere better, Sophie's condo. I'd found her address in the emails Todd so foolishly saved, and when I arrived, I wasn't surprised to see the place was a gaudy reflection of her social media persona. Designer furniture visible through the windows, a shiny new car parked in the driveway. All paid for, no doubt, with the money Todd had siphoned from our accounts. I rang the doorbell and waited. When Sophie opened the door, she was exactly as I imagined, polished, smug, and just young enough to think she'd outsmarted me. Her smile faltered when she saw me, replaced by a look of confusion and mild alarm. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with false politeness. "Yes," I said, my tone as sharp as a knife. "You can tell Todd that his wife says hello." Her eyes widened. For a moment, she looked like a deer in headlights, caught completely off guard. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, stepping back. "Oh, don't play dumb," I snapped, stepping inside before she could shut the door. "You've been sleeping with my husband, plotting to steal my house, my life, my family. But you've made a mistake, Sophie. A big one." She crossed her arms, trying to recover her composure. "If you think you can come here and intimidate me." I cut her off with a laugh. "Oh, Sophie, I'm not here to intimidate you. I'm here to warn you. Todd isn't the man you think he is. He's a liar, a thief, and a coward. And when this is over, he's going to lose everything. Just like you will if you stay tangled up in his mess." Her bravado crumbled slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said weakly, but the tremor in her voice gave her away. I stepped closer, dropping my voice to a whisper. "Don't I? Tell me, Sophie, do you know about the other account? The one he hasn't told you about, or the files he's hidden in his office? Because I do. And if you don't believe me, go ahead. Ask him. See how much of his story holds up." Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked out, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. As I drove home, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Sophie might not have believed me entirely, but I'd planted the seed of doubt. By the time Todd finished his romantic dinner, she'd be full of questions, demanding answers he couldn't provide. I wasn't just unraveling Todd's life. I was turning his accomplice against him. And the best part? This was only the beginning. The fallout from my visit to Sophie's condo came faster than I expected. By the next morning, Todd's mood was downright poisonous. He barely looked at me over breakfast, snapping at Ellie for something as trivial as the volume of the television. "Everything okay?" Ellie asked cautiously, sensing the tension. "Fine," he barked, slamming his coffee mug down on the counter. I hid my smirk behind a sip of orange juice. Sophie had clearly confronted him, and Todd was now juggling a rapidly crumbling facade. After he left for work, I got to work on the final pieces of my plan. First, I called Meredith, my lawyer, to update her on the situation. She listened intently as I detailed the new evidence I'd uncovered, including the financial discrepancies and my encounter with Sophie. "This is good," she said, her voice steady and reassuring. "If we play this right, you'll walk away with the house, your savings, and likely a significant portion of Todd's income." "That's not enough," I replied, my tone cold. "I don't just want to win, I want him to lose." Meredith didn't argue. She simply asked, "What's your next move?" I told her, and even she seemed impressed. By lunchtime, I was ready. I'd scheduled a meeting with Todd's employer, Mr. Grant, under the pretense of discussing Todd's recent behavioral changes. Mr. Grant was a no-nonsense man, the kind who valued loyalty and professionalism above all else. Todd's actions, siphoning money from joint accounts and using company resources for personal gain, were bound to strike a nerve. Mr. Grant greeted me politely, though I could see the curiosity in his eyes. "Mrs. Hamilton, this is unexpected. What's on your mind?" I slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of Todd's questionable financial transactions, emails, and the plane tickets. "This," I said simply. Mr. Grant frowned as he opened the folder, his expression darkening with every page he turned. "Your husband did this?" he asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Yes," I replied, "and he used company time and resources to do it. I thought you'd want to know before it became a bigger problem." Mr. Grant's face hardened. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mrs. Hamilton. I'll handle it from here." As I left the office, I felt a surge of satisfaction. Todd had always prided himself on being the star employee, the man everyone could count on. Now, that image was shattered. That evening, Todd came home later than usual, his face pale and drawn. He didn't say a word to me, heading straight for the study. I followed him, leaning against the doorway as he paced the room. "Rough day?" I asked, feigning innocence. He glared at me, his jaw clenched. "What did you do?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said sweetly, folding my arms. "You talked to Grant," he accused, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Oh, I think I do," I replied, my tone ice cold. "But don't worry, Todd. This is just the beginning." The color drained from his face as he realized the full extent of my betrayal. For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. And he should be. Todd's unraveling began to snowball, just as I had planned. By the end of the week, he'd been summoned to an emergency meeting with Mr. Grant, and from the icy silence that greeted me when he returned home, I knew it hadn't gone well. He shut himself in the study that night, pacing and muttering under his breath, while I made tea in the kitchen and let the sweet scent of chamomile soothe my growing sense of victory. The next morning, Ellie left to visit a friend for the weekend, giving me the perfect opportunity to escalate things further. With her safely out of the picture, I could afford to unleash the next phase of my plan: full exposure. I started by revisiting Sophie's condo. This time, I didn't wait for her to answer the door. Instead, I taped an envelope to her mailbox. Inside were copies of Todd's secret financial accounts, emails, and a handwritten note. "You've been sharing him with more than just me. Good luck figuring out where you stand." It was a calculated risk, but one I knew Sophie wouldn't ignore. She'd already been rattled by my first visit, and this would either push her to confront Todd again or make her start questioning the future he'd promised her. Either way, it would destabilize their alliance further, and that was all I needed. Next, I turned my attention to Todd's reputation. Using the files I'd copied from his office, I sent anonymous emails to several key players in his industry: competitors, colleagues, and even a few of his current clients. The emails contained damning evidence of his financial misconduct, carefully redacted to hide my involvement. By the time Todd returned home that evening, the cracks in his carefully curated world were beginning to show. He slumped into the kitchen chair, his tie loosened and his face haggard. "Everything okay?" I asked, setting a plate of dinner in front of him. He didn't respond, just stared at the plate like it might bite him. "Long day," I pressed, my voice dripping with feigned concern. He looked up at me then, his eyes dark and accusing. "I know it's you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I tilted my head, feigning confusion. "Men? What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Claire," he snapped, slamming his fist on the table. "The emails, the files, Grant. You're trying to ruin me." I crossed my arms, my expression hardening. "Ruin you? Todd, I didn't have to try. You did that all by yourself." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You don't know what you're doing. You think you're in control, but you're just." "Just what?" I interrupted, stepping closer. "A stupid little housewife. Is that it? You think I didn't notice when you started coming home late, when the money started disappearing, when you stopped looking at me like I mattered? I spent 20 years building this life, Todd. My life. And now you want to hand it over to your mistress like it's some cheap party favor." He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't let him. "You thought I'd roll over and let you destroy everything I built. Guess again, his house, this family. You're not taking any of it from me. In fact, by the time I'm done, you'll be lucky if you have the clothes on your back." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of my fury. For the first time in our marriage, Todd looked at me not with disdain or arrogance, but with genuine fear. It was a start. By the time Monday arrived, Todd's world had completely collapsed. His job was gone, terminated after Mr. Grant uncovered the full extent of his financial misconduct. Sophie, predictably, had turned on him as well. I hadn't heard from her directly, but the barrage of missed calls and angry texts on Todd's phone told me all I needed to know. He spent the morning sulking in the living room, scrolling aimlessly on his phone while I went about my day as though everything was normal. But nothing was normal, not anymore. By afternoon, I called him into the kitchen. He shuffled in like a scalded child, his tie loosened, his posture defeated. "We need to talk," I said, motioning for him to sit. He sat down heavily, resting his elbows on the table. "I already know what you're going to say," he muttered. "Good," I replied, sliding a stack of papers across the table. He picked them up, his face paling as he flipped through them. "Divorce papers." "This is everything you wanted," I said, my voice cold but steady. "I'm giving you an out. I'm not dragging Ellie into this. And I'm not fighting you for every last dime. But I am keeping the house." He looked up, his eyes wide with panic. "Claire." "I've already spoken to Meredith," I interrupted. "If you try to contest it, I'll make sure Ellie knows the truth about why her father's life fell apart. And believe me, I have the receipts to prove it." For a moment, he just stared at me, his face a mixture of anger, defeat, and something almost like regret. Almost. Finally, he nodded. "Fine," he said, his voice hollow. I stood, grabbing the papers and heading for the door, signing them by the end of the week. "After that, I don't care what you do." I left him sitting there, slumped and broken, while I went upstairs to the study, the room where it all started. Sitting at the desk, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. The house was mine, not just legally, but in every way that mattered. It had always been mine, really. The result of years of sacrifice, care, and love. Losing Todd wasn't the tragedy I once feared it would be. It was liberation. As I gazed out the window at the magnolia tree I planted 20 years ago, I realized the truth sometimes. The life we build isn't for the people we think it's for. It's for ourselves. For 20 years, I'd poured everything I had into this house, this family, this life. And for 20 years, I let someone else make me believe that my value was tied to theirs. But Todd's betrayal wasn't my end. It was my beginning. The lesson was clear: no one, not a husband, a lover, or anyone else, gets to define your worth. As I signed the last line on the divorce papers, I felt lighter than I had in years. Todd might have lost everything he loved, but I'd finally reclaimed everything I was.